The crystal chandeliers of the grand hall trembled as the string quartet abruptly stopped playing. Serafina stood at the head table, her delicate hand resting possessively on Alpha King Cassian's broad shoulder. "I'm sorry to interrupt the royal banquet." Her voice echoed, laced with a feigned, breathless innocence that instantly chilled the cavernous room. "But the king and I can hide our blessing no longer. I am pregnant with his heir." A collective, suffocating gasp strangled the air. Hundreds of predatory eyes darted to Lisa, the reigning Luna. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. Instead, a genuine, terrifyingly serene smile touched her lips. Slowly, she slid the heavy, diamond-encrusted wedding ring from her finger, placed it gently onto the silver platter before her, turned her back, and disappeared forever. The silence that followed Lisa's departure was not empty. It was a heavy, suffocating weight that pressed down on the chests of the 300 elites gathered in the grand hall. It was the silence of a kingdom fracturing. Cassian sat frozen in his high-backed velvet chair, his golden eyes, usually burning with the fierce authority of the Alpha King, were wide and vacant, anchored to the silver platter in front of him. The platinum band, adorned with a flawless 3-carat diamond, caught the light of the chandeliers. It looked unimaginably small, yet it carried the weight of a severed bond. He could almost still feel the residual warmth of her skin on the metal. She smiled. The thought looped in his mind, a jarring, dissonant chord. He had braced himself for her fury, for the shattering of glass, for a public display of Luna's dominance that would force him to assert his rank. He had expected her to fight for him, or at least fight for her pride. He had not expected that gentle, terrifying curve of her lips. It wasn't a smile of a broken woman. It was the smile of a prisoner who had just been handed the keys to her cell. "Cassian," Serafina murmured, her fingers curling tighter into the fabric of his tailored suit. Her voice, usually a sweet balm to his ego, now grated against his heightened senses like grinding stones. He didn't look at her. The scent of her, sweet vanilla and the faint, earthy undertone of the new life growing within her, suddenly made him nauseous. Around them, the murmurs began, first as a low hum, then rising like a swarm of disturbed hornets. The pack elders, seated at the adjacent tables, were exchanging dark, calculating glances. Alpha King or not, Aluna did not simply walk away from her mate. The bond was sacred. It was biological. It was magic. Tearing it apart should have brought her to her knees in agonizing pain. Yet her steps had been measured, graceful and entirely unbroken. "Guards," Cassian whispered. His voice was hoarse, scraping against his throat. When no one moved, the alpha within him surged forward, snapping his control. He slammed his fists onto the mahogany table, splintering the wood. "Guards!" His roar shook the crystal glasses, sending several crashing to the marble floor. "Stop her. Do not let her leave the grounds." His beta, Marcus, stepped out from the shadows of the pillars, his face a mask of grim reluctance. "Alpha, I cannot." Cassian's eyes flashed a dangerous, luminous amber. He stood, his massive frame towering over the table. Serafina flinched, taking a hasty step back. "What do you mean you can't, Marcus? Are you defying a direct order?" "No, Alpha," Marcus said, bowing his head slightly, exposing his neck in a sign of submission, though his voice remained firm. "I cannot stop her because she's already gone. The perimeter guards reported her exit 3 minutes ago. A black vehicle was waiting for her at the edge of the wards." 3 minutes? Cassian snarled, pushing past the table, ignoring Serafina's gasp as he brushed past her. She was just here. The wards should have locked down. She overrode them, Marcus stated quietly, stepping aside as Cassian marched down the center aisle. The guests parted like water, avoiding the radiating heat of their king's fury. She used the Luna's command. The wards recognized her authority and let her pass. She is outside our territory. Cassian stopped dead in the center of the hall. He reached inward, diving into the mental space where the pack bond resided. He reached for the golden thread that had connected his soul to Lisa's for 5 years. He expected to feel distance, or perhaps the sharp, jagged edges of a wound. Instead, he found absolutely nothing. The space where she had existed in his mind was a smooth, impenetrable wall of obsidian. She hadn't just walked away. She had deliberately, forcefully severed the psychic connection. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, driving the breath from his lungs. He stumbled back half a step. A king without his queen. An alpha without his Luna. He looked back toward the head table. Serafina was watching him, her hands resting protectively over her flat stomach, her lower lip trembling in a picture-perfect display of vulnerability. But Cassian wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the empty chair beside his and the profound, chilling absence that now filled his hall. The torrential rain began just after midnight, washing away whatever faint scent Lisa might have left behind on the slick asphalt. Cassian stood on the balcony of his private study, the cold downpour soaking through his white dress shirt, plastering it to his skin. He didn't feel the cold. The burning chaos in his chest consumed everything else. 4 hours. It had been 4 hours since the banquet, and his elite trackers had returned with absolutely nothing. She meticulously planned this, Marcus said from the doorway. The beta hadn't stepped onto the balcony, respecting the volatile state of his alpha. The vehicle that picked her up had ghost plates. They swapped cars 3 times in the city's underpass network, effectively blinding our street cameras. By the time they reached the interstate, the trail was entirely cold. Cassian gripped the marble balustrade until his knuckles turned white, the stone groaning under the pressure. People do not simply vanish, Marcus. Not in my territory. Not my wife. She isn't just people, Cassian, Marcus replied, dropping the formal title, a rare occurrence that highlighted the severity of the situation. She is Lisa. She built the security infrastructure we are currently trying to use to find her. She knows the blind spots because she created them. Cassian closed his eyes, the rain running down his face like icy tears. Fragments of their past flickered in his mind. The night under the blood moon when he claimed her. The way her laugh used to echo in the gardens before the heavy crown of leadership had hardened him, before he started seeking solace in the uncomplicated, adoring gaze of Serafina. He had justified the affair to himself. Lisa had become distant, always buried in pact ledgers, treaty negotiations, and diplomatic meetings. She was cold, he had told himself. She was a perfect Luna, but she had stopped being a lover. Serafina was soft, pliable, and entirely devoted to him. But now, staring into the dark abyss of the storm, Cassian realized a terrifying truth. Lisa hadn't been distant because she didn't care. She had been distant because she was holding his entire kingdom together while he played house in the shadows. What about her family? Cassian asked, turning back to the room. He stepped inside, ignoring the puddle forming around his Italian leather shoes. The Silver Lake pack. Contact her father. Marcus sighed, crossing his arms. He looked exhausted. I already did. Alpha Thorn was uncooperative. Cassian's eyes narrowed. I am the king. He answers to me. He told me, and I quote, A king who cannot keep his own house in order has no business demanding anything of mine. Marcus repeated, his tone flat. He also stated that if you send trackers into Silver Lake territory, he will consider it an act of war. They don't have her, Cassian. But even if they did, they would die before handing her back to you after tonight. Cassian paced the length of the study. The consequences were piling up faster than he could process. The pregnancy announcement was supposed to have been handled privately. He had intended to tell Lisa in their chambers to negotiate a quiet arrangement. An alpha king could have a mistress. It wasn't unheard of in their history, though highly frowned upon in modern times. But Serafina had panicked. She had seen him looking at Lisa earlier that evening with a softening gaze, and she had forced his hand publicly, cornering him into acknowledging the child, and Lisa had outplayed them both. With a single smile and a discarded ring, she had shifted the narrative. She wasn't the discarded wife. She was the sovereign who had abdicated from a tainted throne. A timid knock echoed through the room. The heavy oak door creaked open, and Serafina peeked inside. She had changed out of her evening gown into one of Cassian's oversized sleep shirts. It was a move that usually sparked a protective, possessive warmth in his chest. Tonight, it just looked messy. "Cassian?" she whispered, stepping into the room. "You're soaked. Please come to bed. The stress isn't good for us." She placed a hand on her stomach. Cassian stared at her. For the first time, the veil of infatuation lifted. He saw the calculation in her eyes, the subtle desperation to secure her new position before the dust settled. "Get out," he said. His voice was dangerously quiet. Serafina froze. "What?" "I said, get out of my study," Cassian repeated, the alpha resonance vibrating in his chest, forcing her wolf to submit. She whimpered, taking a step back. "Marcus, have her moved to the East Wing guest quarters. She is not to enter the royal chambers." "Cassian, you can't!" Serafina cried, real panic finally bleeding into her voice. "I carry your heir." "You carry a child," Cassian corrected coldly. "Whether it is an heir remains to be seen. Now leave." As Serafina was escorted away, sobbing into her hands, Cassian looked back out at the storm. The ring sat on his desk, a mocking reminder of his arrogance. Lisa had left him with the very thing he thought he wanted, and in doing so, she had taken absolutely everything else. 3 days later, the true scale of Lisa's departure began to manifest, not in the absence of her scent, but in the slow, agonizing collapse of Cassian's empire. Lisa sat by the window of a sun-drenched coastal cottage, hundreds of miles from the dense pine forests of the werewolf territories. The scent of salt and sea spray was sharp and clean, a stark contrast to the heavy, politically charged air of the palace. She wore a simple cashmere sweater and loose linen pants, her bare feet tucked beneath her. In her lap rested a sleek, encrypted tablet. She took a sip of her herbal tea, watching the waves crash against the rocky shore. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman who looked tired, but remarkably light. The dark circles under her eyes were fading. The chronic tension that had lived in her jaw for 2 years was gone. The screen of her tablet flickered to life, displaying a secure video feed. A man with sharp features and silver-streaked hair appeared on the screen. It was Elias, the premier financial broker for the supernatural elite, and a man whose loyalty Lisa had secured long before Cassian had ever looked twice at Serafina. "It is done, my lady," Elias said, his voice crisp and professional. "The final asset transfers cleared an hour ago. The holding companies have been fully liquidated and restructured under the new offshore trusts. And the king's access? Lisa asked, her voice calm, devoid of the emotional wreckage one might expect from a betrayed wife. Completely severed, Elias confirmed, a hint of a smirk playing on his lips. Alpha Cassian woke up this morning to find that the royal discretionary funds, the international real estate portfolio, and the primary venture capital accounts are locked. As you instructed, we left the domestic operational funds intact so the pack itself does not suffer. But his personal wealth and the king's treasury? Gone. Lisa nodded slowly. She wasn't acting out of petty vengeance. She was executing a survival protocol. The backstory was something she rarely let herself dwell on, but it fueled her every move. She had known about Serafina for 6 months. At first, it had broken her. She had spent nights pacing the grand halls, choking on the scent of another woman on her mate's clothes. But then, the grief had crystallized into something cold and sharp. She had started looking closer at Cassian's dealings, the way he carelessly alienated their allies, the way his ego had bloated while she managed the delicate treaties that kept the human and wolf worlds from colliding. Cassian was a warrior, a figurehead, but Lisa was the architect. When she discovered Serafina was pregnant a week before the banquet, Lisa knew her time was up. A royal bastard would fracture the pack's loyalty, and Cassian, blinded by his desire for an heir, since Lisa had been unable to conceive, would protect the mistress at the cost of the kingdom. Lisa refused to let herself be collateral damage in his tragic play. So, she began to unweave her threads from his tapestry. "What is the status of the Northern Alliance?" Lisa asked, setting her tea down. "Alpha Tauren sends his regards," Elias replied. "He received your dossier. He has formally withdrawn his support from King Cassian's coalition. Without the northern timber and shipping routes, Cassian's supply lines will dry up in a month." Tauren stated he signed the treaty because he trusted the Luna's wisdom, not the king's temper. "Good. Keep monitoring the situation, Elias. Cassian is arrogant, but he isn't stupid. When he realizes he can't find me through trackers, he will try to find me through the money." "Let him try." Elias chuckled softly. "You don't exist anymore, Lisa. You are a ghost with a very healthy bank account." The screen went black as the connection terminated. Lisa let out a long breath, staring at the empty black glass. Back at the palace, the situation was descending into a tailored hell. Cassian was staring at a stack of red-flagged financial reports on his desk. Marcus stood opposite him, looking paler than usual. "Explain this to me," Cassian demanded, his voice eerily quiet, tapping a heavy finger against a document. "Explain how the king of the unified packs suddenly has his credit lines frozen by a human bank." "It's not just the humans, Alpha," Marcus said, swallowing hard. "The supernatural accounts. They were all held under the Luna's maiden name, or through shell corporations she managed. You gave her full power of attorney 3 years ago when you went on the Southern campaign." Cassian's eyes widened slightly as the memory hit him. He had signed the papers without reading them, dismissing them as administrative drivel. "Handle it, Lisa. I have a war to fight," he had told her. "She didn't steal from us, Cassian," Marcus continued, his voice heavy with dread. "She just took back exactly what she built. The pack accounts are fine, but the royal treasury, the leverage you used to keep the alphas in line, she took it all." Cassian sank back into his chair, the room spinning slightly. The picture was finally coming into focus. The smile at the banquet, the silent departure. It wasn't surrender. It was a checkmate. "Alpha." Marcus hesitated, then pulled one final letter from his jacket. "There is one more thing. From the royal physician." "What now?" Cassian snapped. Is Serafina demanding larger quarters again? No, Marcus said, sliding the sealed envelope across the desk. The physician ran the routine genetic markers on Serafina's blood work this morning to check the pup's wolf strain. He brought this directly to me. Cassian stared at the envelope. A cold dread, far more primal than the loss of money or prestige, began to uncoil in his gut. He ripped it open, his eyes scanning the medical jargon until they landed on the bolded conclusion at the bottom of the page. The silence in the room returned, thicker and more suffocating than before. Cassian slowly crushed the paper in his fist, his golden eyes dimming into a hollow, dead stare. The child Serafina was carrying didn't have the alpha gene. Next steps. I have generated the first 3 chapters and the opening hook. Approximately 2,500 words. The story is set up with high stakes, complex character dynamics, and a major twist at the end of Chapter 3 that will propel the rest of the narrative. Let me know when you are ready for Part 2, where we will explore Cassian's unraveling kingdom, Lisa's new empowered life, and the inevitable collision between the two. The crumpled medical report felt like a burning coal in Cassian's fist. He didn't roar. He didn't shatter the antique desk or shift into his massive wolf form to tear the study apart. He simply sat there, a chilling, absolute stillness overtaking him. The silence in the room was profound, save for the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the glass, a stark contrast to the tempest of betrayal raging within his chest. "Not mine," he breathed, the words tasting like ash on his tongue. Marcus remained rooted to the spot, his posture rigid with a mixture of dread and sympathetic horror. "The markers are conclusive, Alpha. The genetic structure lacks the dominant royal alpha alleles entirely. It's a standard werewolf strain, an omega, perhaps a low-ranking delta. But it is definitively not of your bloodline." Cassian slowly flattened the paper out on the mahogany surface, his eyes tracing the damning lines again and again, hoping the words would somehow reconfigure themselves. They didn't. For months, Serafina's sweet smiles and devoted whispers had been a sanctuary from the relentless pressures of leadership and the perceived coldness of his Luna. She had stroked his ego, made him feel like an infallible god among wolves. And all the while, she had been laying a trap, playing on his desperate, biologically driven desire for an heir, a vulnerability she had expertly exploited. Who? Cassian's voice was a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "We don't know yet," Marcus admitted softly. "The physician is running comparative analyses against the PAC database, but if the father isn't one of ours, find him." Cassian stood, the sudden movement causing his heavy leather chair to scrape violently against the floor. The suppressed alpha aura finally broke free, a suffocating atmospheric pressure that forced Marcus to briefly avert his eyes and bare his throat in instinctual submission. "I want every guard, every tracker, every digital footprint analyzed. Find out who she was seeing. Find out who she was talking to." "And Serafina?" Marcus asked carefully, recovering his composure. Cassian walked to the window, staring out into the black storm. The image of Lisa, placing her wedding ring on the silver platter with that terrifyingly serene smile, flashed behind his eyes. She had known. Somehow, she had known, or at least suspected enough to walk away before the rot fully consumed them both. She hadn't left him just because of the affair. She had left him because he was a fool who had let an impostor compromise the throne. "Leave her in the East Wing," Cassian said, his voice eerily devoid of its usual thunder. "Lock the doors. Post the royal guard. She is not to communicate with anyone inside or outside the palace. Bring her meals, but nothing else. I will deal with her when I have secured my borders. But securing the borders was proving to be a logistical nightmare. By the end of the week, the financial bleed had become a hemorrhage. The Pact's domestic operational funds, the ones Lisa had mercifully left intact, were enough to keep the lights on and the lower-ranking members fed. However, the king's treasury was the grease that kept the political wheels turning. Without it, the delicate alliances Cassian had built began to snap like dry twigs. The Council of Elders convened on the 7th day. The Grand Hall, which had echoed with a collective gasp just a week prior, now hummed with aggressive, disgruntled murmurs. Cassian sat on the elevated throne, feeling its physical hardness for the first time. It felt too large, too empty. The seat beside him, carved from the same ancient oak, was glaringly vacant. Elder Vance, a grizzled wolf with a scarred visage, stood at the center of the mosaic floor. Alpha Cassian, the Southern Pax are refusing to send their tribute. They claim that without the Luna's signature on the trade subsidies, the treaties are null and void. Remind them of our military strength, Vance, Cassian countered, leaning forward, resting his chin on his fist. Treaties are backed by fang and claw, not just ink. With respect, Alpha, Vance retorted, not backing down. Our military strength relies on the northern timber and steel imports for weaponry and fortification. Alpha Tauren has embargoed all shipments. The whispers are spreading, Cassian. They say a king who was fooled by a Delta's mistress and outsmarted by his own wife is no king to follow into battle. A low growl tore through Cassian's chest, silencing the room instantly. His golden eyes flared, pinning Vance in place. Watch your tongue, Elder. My patience is wearing thin. And our loyalty is running on fumes, another elder muttered from the back. Cassian stood, the sheer size of him casting a long shadow across the marble. I will handle the Northern Alliance. I will handle the Southern Pax, and I will retrieve my Luna. Until then, you will hold your lines and remember who conquered those territories in the first place. He stormed out of the hall, the heavy oak doors slamming shut behind him with the finality of a crypt. He walked briskly down the corridor, ignoring the frantic salutes of the guards. He didn't go to his study. He didn't go to the war room. Instead, his feet carried him, almost against his will, to the royal chambers. He pushed the door open. The room smelled of stale air and faint lavender. Lisa's signature scent, now rapidly fading into nothingness. Her closet was half empty, stripped only of her most practical clothing. Her vanity was cleared of her meticulously organized ledgers. He sat on the edge of the sprawling silk-sheeted bed, dropping his head into his hands. For the first time since he was a young pup, fighting for dominance in the training rings, Alpha King Cassian felt entirely, suffocatingly alone. The crown upon his head had never felt heavier, and the realization was a bitter pill to swallow. The true power of his kingdom had never resided in his roar. It had resided in her quiet, unwavering grace. And he had thrown it away. The Pacific Northwest was a haven for those who wished to remain hidden. The constant drizzle and thick, evergreen canopy provided a natural cloak against both satellite surveillance and the keen noses of supernatural trackers. Lisa stood on the wraparound deck of a sprawling, glass-fronted cabin nestled high in the Cascade Mountains. The air was sharp with the scent of pine and wet earth. It was a far cry from the opulent, suffocating luxury of the royal palace. Here, the silence wasn't a weapon. It was a sanctuary. She pulled her thick cardigan tighter around her shoulders, holding a mug of black coffee. Despite the serene surroundings, the internal war raged on. The obsidian wall she had erected in her mind to sever the mate bond was holding, but it required constant, exhausting mental upkeep. There were nights when her wolf howled in agony, thrashing against the psychic barrier, desperate to feel Cassian's golden warmth on the other side. He betrayed us, she would remind her wolf over and over, until the beast whimpered into submission. He chose his ego over our empire. The sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway pulled her from her thoughts. A sleek, black SUV pulled up to the front steps. The doors opened, and 3 figures emerged, their expensive, tailored coats a stark contrast to the rugged environment. Lisa set her mug on the wooden railing and walked back inside, leaving the sliding glass door open to let the crisp air fill the living room. She took a seat at the head of a massive, live-edged dining table. There was no throne here, but as the 3 men entered, the undeniable aura of a sovereign filled the space. Elias, her financial broker, led the way. Behind him were 2 figures that would have sent Cassian into a murderous rage had he seen them. The first was Alpha Tauren of the Northern Alliance, a towering man with ice-blue eyes and a permanent scowl. The second was Silas, a high-ranking emissary for the Human Geopolitical Council, a shadow organization that monitored supernatural activity to prevent global panic. "Luna," Alpha Tauren said, offering a deep, respectful bow that he had rarely ever afforded Cassian. "Tauren," Lisa replied, her voice smooth and commanding. "Please sit, all of you. And it's just Lisa now. I left the title on a silver platter." "Titles are just words," Silas said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he took a seat. "Influence is what matters. And currently, Miss Silverlake, you hold the leashes to 3 of the continent's major supply chains." Lisa steepled her fingers, her gaze sweeping over the men. "I assume you received the new logistical frameworks I sent." "We did," Tauren rumbled, leaning his heavy forearms on the table. "And my pack is in agreement. We will route our timber and shipping exclusively through your holding companies. Cassian's tariffs were bleeding us dry to fund his southern campaigns. Your proposed margins are generous." "They are fair, Tauren," Lisa corrected gently. "I am not looking to hoard wealth. I am looking to establish a sustainable economy that isn't dependent on the volatile temper of a single alpha." Silas nodded in agreement, opening a sleek leather briefcase and pulling out a stack of documents. "The Human Council echoes this sentiment. King Cassian's aggressive expansion was drawing too much attention. Your sudden departure, while dramatic, presents a unique opportunity. We are prepared to offer you exclusive contracting rights for the new infrastructure developments on the western seaboard. However, there is a caveat." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "Cassian is becoming unstable," Silas warned, his tone grave. "Our surveillance indicates heavy troop movements near the southern borders. He is trying to project strength to mask his financial vulnerability. If he provokes a territorial war to unite his fracturing packs, the Human Council will be forced to intervene militarily. We cannot have wolves fighting in the streets." A cold knot tightened in Lisa's stomach. Cassian was reacting exactly as she had feared, like a wounded animal cornered in a trap of his own making. He was defaulting to violence because it was the only language he truly understood. "He won't start a war," Lisa said softly, though the conviction in her voice made the men lean in. "He doesn't have the funds to sustain a campaign longer than 3 weeks. And his beta, Marcus, is too pragmatic to let him march into a slaughter. Desperate men do desperate things," Tauren pointed out. "And from what I hear, he is a man who has lost his treasury, his wife, and his pride in a single evening." Lisa's expression remained an unreadable mask of calm. I will manage Cassian. You focus on securing the shipping lanes and finalizing the human contracts. The royal pack will capitulate once they realize their king cannot feed them. As the meeting concluded and the men filed out, Elias lingered behind. He poured himself a cup of coffee from the carafe on the counter, watching Lisa with a mix of admiration and concern. You're playing a dangerous game, Lisa, Elias murmured. You are strangling his kingdom to death. Eventually, he will trace the grip back to you. That is the point, Elias, Lisa said, turning to face the sprawling view of the mountains. Cassian never respected what he had until he was forced to fight for it. I am not hiding from him. I am simply forcing him to walk through the fire he started. She reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing against a small, encrypted burner phone. She had used it only once, to send a single, untraceable message to a specific contact within the royal palace. The board was set. Now, she just had to wait for the king to make his move. The royal palace, once a vibrant hub of supernatural diplomacy and pack life, had taken on the suffocating atmosphere of a mausoleum. The grand chandeliers were dimmed to conserve energy, casting long, skeletal shadows across the marble floors. The constant hum of activity had been replaced by hushed, anxious whispers that ceased the moment Cassian entered a room. It had been exactly 1 month since the banquet. Cassian stood in the training yards, stripped to the waist, the cold autumn air biting at his sweat-slicked skin. He drove his fists into a heavy leather sandbag with brutal, rhythmic precision. Crack, crack, crack. The sound echoed off the stone walls of the courtyard, a violent metronome tracking his spiraling control. Every punch was a memory. Crack, the serene smile on Lisa's face. Crack, the damning words of the medical report. Crack, the sneer of the pack elders as they reported yet another broken treaty. With a final, thunderous roar, Cassian threw a devastating right hook. The heavy chain snapping above, the sandbag tore from its mount and launched 10 feet across the yard, exploding into a cloud of dust and leather upon impact. He stood there, chest heaving, his knuckles bruised and bleeding, though his advanced healing was already knitting the split skin back together. It wasn't enough. The physical exertion did nothing to quiet the deafening silence in his mind where the mate bond used to sing. Impressive! A dry voice echoed from the archway. Cassian turned, a snarl dying on his lips as Marcus stepped into the courtyard. The beta looked older, the stress of the past month etching deep lines around his eyes. He held a silver tablet in one hand and a thick manila folder in the other. Did you come to critique my form, Marcus? Or do you actually have news? Cassian grabbed a towel from a nearby bench, wiping the sweat from his face. Both, unfortunately, Marcus replied, not flinching at the Alpha's harsh tone. The Southern Packs have officially declared autonomy. Without the trade subsidies, they claim they can no longer afford to pay the royal tax. They have erected blockades on the main highways. Cassian threw the towel down in disgust. Treason? It's outright treason. Mobilize the Royal Guard. We march south at dawn. I will string their Alphas up by their... With what army, Cassian? Marcus interrupted, his voice rising, cracking like a whip across the courtyard. Cassian froze, his golden eyes flashing dangerously. Excuse me? With what army? Marcus repeated, stepping forward, shedding the deferential beta persona for the brutal honesty of a lifelong friend. The guard hasn't been paid their full wages in 3 weeks. The mess halls are rationing meat. The armory is depleted because the northern timber and steel imports vanished the night your wife did. If you march south, you won't be leading an army. You'll be leading a starving mob into a slaughter. The truth of the words hit Cassian harder than any physical blow. He slowly sank onto the wooden bench, resting his elbows on his knees, staring at his bloodied hands. He was a king ruling over a kingdom of ghosts and debt. What about the guard who slept with Seraphina? Cassian asked quietly, changing the subject, unable to look his friend in the eye. Found him, Marcus said grimly. A young sentinel named Kyle. He confessed immediately. He thought he was moving up in the world. Claimed Seraphina promised him a place in the royal court once she was Luna. Cassian let out a hollow, humorless laugh. A sentinel. I lost my Luna, my wealth, and my respect for a sentinel's bastard. He rubbed his face in his hands. Throw Kale in the dungeons. And Seraphina? Still locked in the East Wing, Marcus said. She cries most days, begs to see you. She says she can explain. There is nothing left to explain, Cassian muttered. He finally looked up at Marcus. Is that all the bad news for today? Or is there more in that folder? Marcus looked down at the manila envelope, a strange mix of hesitation and relief crossing his features. There is one more thing. It's not bad news, necessarily. But it is perplexing. He handed the envelope to Cassian. It was heavy, sealed with a thick dollop of crimson wax that bore an unfamiliar crest, a stylized wolf howling at a crescent moon, intertwined with a scale of justice. Cassian broke the seal and slid the documents out. It was a formal legal summons, drafted on high-grade parchment, citing an obscure, ancient pack law regarding the dissolution of territorial assets. What is this? Cassian frowned, scanning the dense legalese. It's a summons for a mediation, Marcus explained, stepping closer. It was delivered by a neutral human courier an hour ago. The plaintiff is claiming rights to the remaining operational funds of the Royal Pack due to gross mismanagement and breach of marital fiduciary duty. Cassian's heart stopped. His eyes darted to the bottom of the page, searching for a signature. There was none, only the stamp of a prominent, highly aggressive supernatural law firm based out of Seattle. But it was the location of the mediation that made the breath catch in his throat. The Obsidian Hotel, Neutral Zone, Seattle, Washington. Friday, 8 p.m. Seattle, Cassian whispered. He looked up at Marcus, a desperate, frantic hope igniting in his chest for the first time in a month. She isn't hiding. No, Marcus agreed softly. She's not hiding, Cassian. She's inviting you. She's holding the last thread of your kingdom over a fire, and she wants you to come watch her burn it. Cassian stood up, the exhaustion vanishing from his muscles, replaced by a sudden, electric surge of adrenaline. She had left a breadcrumb. It was a trap, a humiliation, a calculated move to force him to his knees in a neutral territory where his alpha command held no legal weight, and he was going to walk right into it. Prepare the jet, Cassian ordered, his voice ringing with a newfound clarity. Cancel all internal meetings. Put the guard on a defensive perimeter. What are you going to do, Cassian? Marcus asked, watching the dangerous spark return to his king's eyes. Cassian looked at the legal document, his thumb brushing over the wax seal. I am going to go see my wife. The Obsidian Hotel in Seattle was a marvel of modern architecture. A towering spire of black glass that pierced the perpetually gray skyline. More importantly, it was designated as absolute neutral ground, a sanctuary strictly moderated by the Human Geopolitical Council. Embedded within the foundation were ancient runic dampeners, that effectively neutralized supernatural abilities. As Cassian stepped through the revolving glass doors, the change was instantaneous and nauseating. The ever-present thrum of his alpha aura, the heavy, dominant energy he wore like a second skin, was violently stripped away. He stumbled slightly, a hand flying to the cold granite of a decorative pillar to steady himself. For the first time in his adult life, he felt entirely, terrifyingly mortal. "Are you all right, Cassian?" Marcus asked quietly, his own face slightly pale from the sudden suppression of their wolf senses. "I'm fine," Cassian gritted out, straightening his suit jacket. He felt exposed, his heightened hearing reduced to the mundane hum of the lobby's jazz music, his keen sense of smell overwhelmed by the sterile scent of expensive floor cleaner and human perfumes. A sleekly dressed concierge intercepted them, his eyes lingering on Cassian's imposing frame with a mix of awe and strictly professional detachment. "Mr. Silver Lake? The mediation party is waiting for you in the Apex penthouse. The private elevator is this way." Mr. Silver Lake. Cassian's jaw ticked. Not Alpha, not King. The psychological warfare had already begun before he had even stepped into the room. The elevator ride was a silent, agonizing ascent. When the gold-plated doors finally slid open, they revealed a sprawling penthouse that looked more like a corporate boardroom than a hotel suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying view of the Puget Sound. And there she was. Lisa sat at the head of a long, polished obsidian table. She wasn't wearing the traditional flowing silks of a Luna. She wore a razor-sharp, charcoal power suit, her dark hair pulled back into a severe, elegant twist. The soft, accommodating woman he had taken for granted was gone. In her place sat a sovereign who commanded the room not through a magical aura, but through sheer, terrifying competence. Flanking her were three individuals: Elias, the financial broker, a woman Cassian recognized as a high-powered supernatural litigator, and Silas, the human council emissary. Cassian's heart slammed against his ribs. The urge to cross the room, to pull her into his arms, to bury his face in her neck and inhale the lavender scent he had been starving for, was almost overpowering. But as his eyes met hers, he froze. Her gaze was completely devoid of warmth. It was like looking into a beautifully carved statue of ice. "Cassian," Lisa said, her voice smooth, level, and entirely businesslike. "Please, take a seat. We have a lot of ground to cover." Cassian didn't move toward the chair she gestured to. Instead, he walked slowly toward her side of the table, his eyes locked on her face, searching for a flicker of the woman he loved. "Lisa, please, we don't need to do this with lawyers and human watchdogs. Come home." "Home?" Lisa tilted her head, a microscopic, hollow smile touching her lips. "To the palace you funded with blood. To the chambers you shared with a pregnant Delta while I balanced your ledgers. No, Cassian. That home burned to the ground a month ago." "She wasn't pregnant with my child," Cassian said, his voice dropping to a desperate, ragged whisper, leaning his hands on the table. "I know that now. She lied to me, Lisa. She manipulated the situation." "I am aware," Lisa replied smoothly, not blinking. "I received a copy of the medical report the same morning you did." Cassian recoiled as if struck. "You knew? If you knew she was lying, why didn't you expose her? Why did you leave?" "Because the paternity of the child was irrelevant," Lisa stated, her voice hardening, cutting through his desperation like a scalpel. The fact that you were careless enough to let an impostor into the royal bedchamber, the fact that you allowed your ego to jeopardize the stability of the entire pack. That is why I left. Serafina was just a symptom, Cassian. You are the disease. The brutal honesty of her words echoed in the silent room. Cassian looked at Marcus, seeking some form of backup, but his beta was staring at the floor, his silence a damning agreement. "Sit down, Mr. Silverlake." The human emissary, Silas, interjected, adjusting his glasses. "Or the security detail will escort you out, and the negotiations will proceed in absentia, which will not end favorably for your remaining assets." Defeated, suffocating under the weight of his own hubris, Cassian slowly walked to the opposite end of the table and sank into the chair. He looked across the expanse of black glass at his wife. She wasn't an ocean away. She was merely 10 feet across a table. Yet, as the lawyers opened their briefcases, Cassian realized she had never been further out of his reach. The mediation did not resemble a negotiation. It was a highly formalized execution. "Let us review the current state of the royal pack," the litigator began, projecting a holographic display onto the center of the table. A map of the continent materialized, shaded in various tones of red and blue. As of midnight last night, the Southern Packs have officially defaulted on their treaty obligations to the Crown. The Northern Alliance has enacted a full trade embargo. I am aware of my borders, Cassian growled, his pride weakly fighting through his despair. This is a temporary logistical setback, a rebellion that will be crushed once my treasury is unlocked. Elias, the broker, steepled his fingers. Therein lies the problem, Alpha Cassian. Your treasury cannot be unlocked because it no longer exists in a format you can access. When you granted your wife full power of attorney, you gave her the authority to restructure the kingdom's debt. Cassian frowned, confusion mingling with his anger. Debt? The royal treasury has never been in debt. Your military campaigns were expensive, Lisa said quietly, speaking for the first time in 20 minutes. You conquered territories, but you never built infrastructure. You bled the Southern Packs dry with taxes to fund the northern borders. The kingdom was operating on a massive deficit. I hid it from the Council of Elders to protect your reputation, utilizing my family's private wealth to subsidize the royal military. Cassian stared at her, the blood draining from his face. You paid for the army? I bought the debt, Lisa corrected. And over the past month, my holding companies have purchased the remaining sovereign bonds of the Southern and Northern Packs. As of this morning, Cassian, I am not just holding your personal wealth. I am the sole proprietor of the United Packs economy. The map on the table flashed, the red territories turning a solid, glowing blue. You encircled me, Cassian whispered, the sheer, staggering magnitude of her strategy finally clicking into place. She hadn't just run away. She had orchestrated a bloodless coup. While he was punching sandbags and hunting for ghosts, she had been systematically dismantling the financial architecture of his reign. The Human Council has reviewed the new logistical frameworks established by Ms. Silverlake, Silas stated, his tone devoid of empathy. They are sustainable. They prioritize infrastructure over warfare. Under your leadership, King Cassian, the supernatural community was inching toward a public exposure event. That is unacceptable to my government. So, what is this? Cassian asked, his voice shaking with a potent mix of rage and profound awe. He looked at Lisa. Are you going to starve my pack until they turn on me? Your pack is currently being fed by grain shipments I routed through the eastern seaboard yesterday, Lisa replied evenly. I have no intention of harming the people, Cassian. They are innocent in this. but they cannot thrive under a king who governs with fangs instead of foresight. The litigator slid a thick, leather-bound folio across the smooth glass table. It came to a stop inches from Cassian's hands. "These are the terms of surrender," Lisa said, her eyes meeting his, unyielding and absolute. "You will sign the Articles of Abdication. You will relinquish the title of Alpha King. Marcus will be appointed as Regent Alpha of the Central Territory, operating under a council led by the Northern and Southern Alphas." Cassian looked down at the gold-embossed letters on the folio. "And me? What happens to me?" "You will be granted a modest estate in the Yukon Territory," Lisa said, her voice dropping a fraction of an octave, hinting at the exhaustion buried beneath her iron facade. "You will live in exile. If you attempt to rally loyalists, if you attempt to contact the military, the Human Council will classify you as a domestic terrorist, and the Allied Pax will hunt you down." "You would do that?" Cassian asked, a single tear breaking free and tracking down his scarred cheek. "After 5 years, you would banish me to the ice?" Lisa looked at him, and for a fleeting, heartbreaking second, the impenetrable ice in her eyes cracked. He saw the grief, the years of quiet suffering, the agony of a mate bond she had forcefully cauterized to save herself. "You banished yourself, Cassian," she whispered. "The night you let her announce a lie in our halls and expected me to sit beside you and smile." The penthouse fell into a suffocating silence. The only sound was the distant, muffled howling of the Seattle wind battering against the reinforced glass. Cassian stared at the heavy fountain pen resting beside the folio. To sign was to erase his legacy. To sign was to admit that he was not the infallible god the history books had painted him to be. He was just a wolf who had grown too large, too arrogant, and had crushed the only real treasure he possessed under his own heavy paws. He looked at Marcus. His lifelong friend, his beta, stood perfectly still, his eyes filled with a heavy, mournful truth. Marcus knew it too. The kingdom was already gone. This signature was just a formality to prevent a slaughter. "If I sign this," Cassian said, his voice a rasping croak, his eyes locked on Lisa, "do I ever get to see you again?" Lisa's posture remained rigid, but her hands, folded neatly on the table, tightened slightly. "No, Cassian. The mate bond is broken. Our paths diverge here. I never wanted to break you," he confessed, the words tearing from his throat, stripping away the last remnants of the Alpha King. He wasn't negotiating anymore. He was bleeding out on the polished floor of a human hotel. "I got lost, Lisa. I got lost in the roaring, in the power. I forgot that you were the quiet ground holding me up." "I know," Lisa said softly. The anger was gone now, replaced by a profound, hollow tragedy. "And that is why you cannot be king. A ruler cannot forget the ground he stands on without eventually falling." Cassian swallowed hard. He reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the fountain pen. It felt heavier than any broadsword he had ever swung in battle. He uncapped it, the black ink pooling at the golden nib. He didn't read the dense legal text. He didn't need to. He knew exactly what it cost. With a swift, jagged motion, he dragged the pen across the signature line. Cassian Vance. No titles. No pack affiliations. Just a man. The moment the ink dried, a strange, metaphysical shockwave rippled through the room. Even the humans seemed to feel the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure. The magical contract of his kingship, tied to the ley lines of the territories, snapped. Cassian gasped, clutching his chest as a physical pain lanced through his heart, the final, absolute severing of his dominion. Lisa stood up. She didn't look triumphant. She looked incredibly tired. The funds will be released to Marcus's accounts within the hour, Lisa said to the litigator. She turned to Silas. The transition will be peaceful. You have my word. Pleasure doing business with you, Ms. Silverlake. Silas nodded respectfully. Lisa gathered her tablet and turned toward the private elevator. She didn't look back. Lisa, Cassian called out, his voice cracking, remaining in his seat. She paused at the elevator doors, her back to him. I'm sorry, he whispered to the empty space between them. Lisa stood in the doorway for a long moment. She didn't turn around, but Cassian saw the slight, almost imperceptible drop of her shoulders. The doors slid shut, sealing her behind a wall of gold, and taking the last light of his empire with her. Cassian sat alone at the massive obsidian table, the rain lashing against the windows, a king of nothing, finally understanding the true cost of a hollow throne. The tragic fall of Alpha King Cassian serves as a chilling reminder that true power is never found in brute strength or blind arrogance, but in the quiet, unyielding grace of those who hold the foundation together. Lisa's masterful gambit proved that a broken heart can sometimes forge the sharpest crown. If you were captivated by this intense, cinematic tale of betrayal, strategy, and supernatural drama, please like this story, share it with your fellow romance and fantasy readers, and subscribe for more gripping, high-stakes original fiction. Let me know in the comments if you think Cassian deserved his fate, or if you were rooting for a different ending.